talking about whether Thomas Jefferson lived up to his words or not. And remember that these words that we're talking about are these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or maybe different groups of people have had different views on whether he lived up to his words or not. As we went throughout the stations, we looked at 4 different ideas. We looked at American Europeans' view on the Louisiana Purchase, Jefferson and his views on slavery that are extremely complicated, Jefferson and original Americans, and Jefferson and the Haitian Revolution. So as we went through, and the stations are on Google Classroom, so if you want to re-look at any of the articles, you can find them there. So in our debrief, we said that American Europeans benefited, hooray, from the Louisiana Purchase, a nice big chunk of land that Thomas Jefferson gave them. A nice way to spread out and make money. Thanks, DJ. Jefferson didn't like slavery, but he enslaved people. Jefferson didn't have respect for original Americans and their way of life. He made them sign treaties that gave up their land and told them they should stop hunting, and start farming. Jefferson didn't support the ex-slaves of Haiti who revolted and gained their independence. So here's Jefferson and his contradictory views, giving land to American Europeans, enslaving people even when he knew it wasn't right, burning, taking away original American land and forcing them to farm, and denying the ex-slaves of Haiti their right to independence. When they became independent, he didn't recognize their country. So he opposed slavery, although he enslaved hundreds of people. He really liked the lifestyle. And if you want to watch a video, you can click on the link and be able to watch a video about this duality.
And we're back at the U.S. Library of Congress. The library, founded in 1800, was first house in the U.S. Capitol until it got its own building, now named after Thomas Jefferson.
Right, and Jefferson was the main author of the Declaration of Independence, as we've discussed, but he was also the nation's 3rd president and a lifelong slaveholder.
Which is kind of ironic, but Jefferson owned hundreds of slaves, yes, it's true, at his Monticello estate in Virginia, despite being an opponent of the slave trade.
Right, and that's what's most interesting, is that Jefferson actually thought that slavery was harmful to both the slaves and their masters, but he indeed did own slaves himself for his entire life. Now, several exhibits have explored this moral conflict of Jefferson's, and earlier this year, VOA's Julie Tabo went to Monticello to find out more. Let's take a look.
Thomas Jefferson lived much of his life at Monticello, a sprawling plantation near Charlottesville, Virginia. But although he wrote the Declaration of Independence, he owned 600 slaves during his lifetime. That contradiction is the subject of 2 groundbreaking exhibits, one at Monticello. Hundreds of African-American slaves and their families lived here, and they labored for Jefferson's enterprises. Susan Stein is senior curator at Monticello. She says Jefferson was born into a culture dominated by slavery.
In America, in his time, 20% of all the population was enslaved. And Jefferson was one of those slaveholders. So coming to Monticello is an opportunity for people to think about this complexity.
Stein and fellow curators wanted visitors to see the complete picture. So they decided to focus on Monticello slaves. Many of them lived and worked on Mulberry Row, the plantation's main street. A computer animation shows what the street looked like. Some of the slave homes and workshops will be reconstructed. Wormley Hughes was Jefferson's head gardener. He tended to his master's prized plants and trees.
Wormley Hughes planted seeds, bulbs, trees. He also dug the grave of his master, Thomas Jefferson, in July 1826. We're standing at the site of the original blacksmith shop.
Historian Cinder Stanton learned about Hughes and other slaves from Jefferson's extensive records. But for Stanton, that was not enough. Almost 20 years ago, she and a colleague began an oral history project to identify the descendants of Monticello's slaves.
It's a way of seeing how the institution was cruel and oppressive, but within that institution, people were able to make valuable lives and pass on values and skills to their children.
Wormley H. Hughes.
Karen Hughes White is a descendant of Wormley Hughes. She collects artifacts and other objects related to slavery. White attended an oral history gathering at Monticello 15 years ago.
I learned where my ancestors walked. I learned where they worked. The tour was designed specifically for us, and we knew where we fit in the scheme of Monticello, the home of the president.
White says she has come to understand Jefferson.
I think he was a great founding father, but I also know that he enslaved many of my ancestors. So it's just learning about a time of history and acknowledging it for what it was and not trying to paint it one way or the other.
A second exhibit, presented by the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History, lists the names of every slave Jefferson ever owned on a huge wall. Rex Ellis co-curated the show.
In order to see Jefferson clearly, you have to see him through the lens and through the eyes of his enslaved population. And even if only what we know about them is their name, it is significant.
Thomas Jefferson died on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and almost 40 years before slavery was abolished. He's buried here at Monticello, and several of his slaves likely rest here too, although in unmarked graves. Julie Tabo, VOA News, Charlottesville, Virginia.
This was pretty interesting, Alex. Definitely a part of Jefferson's life that we don't usually hear about.
Yeah, it was very enlightening. I think to think about some of these conflicts that our founding fathers faced that are very similar to a lot of conflicts officials all over the world face today.
And we're back.
So going back to our notes, focusing on, so that's one video. There are many videos that you can watch. I'm going to go on to the next topic. Again, believing that they should go from hunting to farming, sitting and adopt an American other European ways.
Thomas Jefferson is the most important individual in developing a coherent, well-articulated policy to tribes. He wished to promote settlement into the interior onto Indian lands. However, Jefferson thought that this could work for the benefit of both groups. The Indians would become agrarians, would receive training in schools, education, would be subject to the ministration of missionaries. In time, as Jefferson said to one visiting delegation of chiefs, you will intermarry with us, we'll all be one, we'll all be Americans.
He also forced them to sign some treaties, which was a major problem that a lot of people had with him. So your turn. You're going to decide whether he lived up to these words, and these are the words that we're talking about. So just as a rehash, all men, only rich men, possibly. Liberty, which means freedom. Pursuit of happiness, which means have fun, earn your own living, and these are things that are supposed to be not taken away. So what you're going to be doing is making two monuments, how you think America remembers him today and how you think he should be remembered. Examples would be this one of the Paradox of Liberty monument that was made at the African American Museum. This would be possibly a very different way that you might interpret just based on, especially compared to this picture, which is how most people think of Thomas Jefferson today. So think about how you could create a monument that might look a little bit different than the normal one. And that's pretty much the assignment.